Well, welcome this morning. We are in our second week in our series called Loss, and many of you, because of the snow, were not with us last week, and so I just want to do a little bit of catch up on why we're even talking about this idea of loss. It's because there are so many times in our life when life kind of takes a detour. Right? Could be an unexpected social detour that life takes. Could be an unexpected relationship detour. Could be an unexpected financial detour. Right? Could be an unexpected professional detour. And the big question that we're asking is this: is how can we turn toward God in those moments? In the moments of painful and often unexpected change in our lives. You know, the book that we're basing the sermon series off of is called When God Interrupts. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read, by Craig Barnes. And he says in this book, describing why he wrote it, he said, "It is for those who have faced significant loss that has forced them to make a frightening choice. Will they clutch at something else for their salvation? Or can they leave their hands open long enough to receive the life that Jesus was dying to give them?" And this morning, we're talking about the loss of health. I got a call when I was house sitting 1,800 miles away in Texas. It was my mom on the phone. I was 22 years old at the time, and she told me that my dad had passed out on his desk at work the day before, and so the subsequent visit to the doctor had the doctor recommending some tests. I said, "Tests? Tests for what?" "Cancer." I said, "Cancer? Are you serious? No. Not my dad. My dad's really, really healthy. My dad's really, really fun. He's a great dad. He's going to be a really good granddad. How is any of this even possible?" My mom said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And hung up. Have you ever had a call like that? Have you ever had a doctor visit like that? I know many of you have. Where you get this news and you're thinking to yourself, "What the health?" No, you don't think health, though. I was just kidding about that. You never said that in your life. But you are thinking the other thing. It sounds like health. And you start wondering to yourself whether or not it is from that exact place where physical sickness emerges in such unwelcome and untimely ways. And then you start to wonder, what does God have to say about this? What is His role in it all? Can't God stop it? Can't He change it? Sometimes, if we're honest, in the middle of those moments, we feel like God, if He doesn't, is either unwilling or unable to change it. And we're not quite sure which is worse. You know, for many of you in this room, you have wrestled with this question more in your lifetime than some of us can even conceive as bearing. And listen, I am fully aware of the fact that I'm going to stand up here for the next 25 minutes and talk to you the best I can about when a health abandons. And I'm in, as far as I know, a healthy condition. And so I know for some of you that are right in the middle of it right now, there could be a little disconnect. But I want you to know that it's my prayer and my hope and my heart this morning over our next few minutes together to communicate as best as I can the heart of God in the midst of abandoned health. Some of you have been dealing with it for a long time. Others of you are newcomers on the scene of physical illness. There are such varying degrees of being abandoned by health, And so whether you're listening as a caregiver to someone who has been abandoned by health, or whether you are the one who's experiencing this pain firsthand, it's my hope and prayer that our next few minutes together will be an encouragement and a comfort, and maybe even include a spiritual aha moment or two, so that you might be able to experience God's amazing grace in the midst of sickness. 2 Corinthians 4:16 and 17 in the Message says, we're not giving up. How could we? Even though on the outside, it often looks like things are falling apart on us, on the inside, where God is making new life, not a day goes by without his unfolding grace. So here's the big question, right? Do you really believe that? Do you actually believe that in those moments of physical illness or mental illness or emotional unhealth, in those hardest and darkest moments, that God is still present and offering his amazing grace? It's a huge question, and not one with an answer that's easy to understand. But what I hope to do this morning is start us down that journey, and that maybe this morning we can just begin to grasp God's heart for the sick when we look at how he interacted with one particular individual in John chapter 5. And he interacts with this individual in John chapter 5, and he engages in three particular ways, which I think he engages with us as well. So we're going to learn how Jesus approaches the hurting. Number 2, he adjusts our hoping. And then finally, number 3, how he offers true healing. So as we turn to John chapter 5, Jesus sets this miracle up, and this is what this is. It's one of the miracles recorded in John. He sets it up kind of like in the movies, right? Well, when you, in the beginning of a movie, and the scene is like large scale, so it's like the skyline of New York City. And then it starts to zoom in a little bit, doesn't it? And the camera starts to get closer to the city, and it gets amidst the buildings and into a crowd of people, and then finally focuses on the main character. Well, the intro to John 5 is real similar to that. Here we see the occasion is a feast. They're in Jerusalem. They're near a sheep gate at the pool of Bethesda, which we'll talk more about the significance of that in a second. Near the colonnades, amidst the multitudes, with a number of disabled people. And finally, he focuses on one particular man that had been there, invalid. He had been sick and hurting and unable to move for, count them, 38 years. 38 years. That is a long time. Watch as the scene unfolds. Follow with me. You can follow on the screen or in your Bibles if you have them. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And so one who was there had been invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water stirred. Well, while I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And we'll talk more about the folklore behind that if you were the first to get in the pool, you were healed. More on that in a minute. So then Jesus says to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, though. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath, and so the law forbids you to carry your mat." More on that in a moment, too. But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.' So they asked him, 'Well, who was this fellow who told you to pick up your mat and walk?' The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, 'See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well." You know, when I was a kid, I used to ride my bike down to the pool for swim practice in the mornings. And if you're familiar with Catonsville, I used to ride down this huge hill on Frederick Road and turn left into the Five Oaks pool parking lot. And at that time, the pool parking lot was fully made of gravel. And this hill that I rode down was huge. And so I would get I'm not kidding, something like, I would top out at 35 miles an hour. So I'd be blazing down this thing. And this one particular morning, I turned and slid on a gravel rock. And man, did I slide. And I slid on this part of my leg and slid halfway across this parking lot. My leg was bleeding profusely. I think there were bones hanging out of it. I don't know. But it was a mess. No skin to be found on the side of my leg. And so they heard me scream, some of the coaches that were there for swim practice and some of the other grown-ups. And they came in to help patch me up. And that's exactly what they did. They came out with their Band-Aids and their first aid kit, and they started paying attention to my leg, and my injuries on my leg. They got it splinted. They said, "Don't move," the whole deal. Well, about the same time, someone had called my mom, who was at home, and said, "You better come on down here. Your son just wiped out, and his whole half of his leg is all the skin's off and everything." And so after they're patching up for a little while, finally my mom comes down, and she comes over to me. And you would expect that my mom would join in the patchwork of my leg. That she would come over and first look at it and diagnose what needs to be done next. But do you know she didn't do that? My mom came over and didn't even look at my leg. She looked at me and she gave me a huge hug. And for just a moment, all that pain was gone. And I think that's what this passage is teaching us about Jesus Christ. Is that for Jesus, what we learn is that the primary task of a Savior is not in making the physical hurt go away, but it is foremost about seeing and loving the one who is hurt. Just like my mom did for me, Jesus first looks at the heart and not the hurt. Now you'll notice in the first few verses of this passage, not only does Jesus approach the hurting, which is not random. In fact, Jesus did that all the time. I mean, throughout most of his ministry, he went to those who were sick and hurting. Whether physically sick and hurting, or mentally, or emotionally, or otherwise. But what's fascinating about this passage is that in verse 6, Jesus starts with a question. He engages him in conversation. Now you would think that if the only thing that Jesus were interested in was healing the man, he could have done it. I mean, Jesus is God. He could have gone abracadabra and fixed him and gone away. But he didn't. He leads with a question. I believe that question indicates that Jesus' goals extend far beyond healing illness and include, perhaps more importantly, to let the man know that he's deeply loved, no matter his physical, mental, or emotional condition. And he lets us know that as well. In short, Jesus draws near to us to care for much more than the hurt, but for the heart of the hurting. Now that is not to minimize the hurt and the pain that physical illness brings. And Jesus doesn't minimize that either. But rather, I think it's to emphasize the peace that can be found in a God who draws near. At the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about that Jesus is Emmanuel, which means God with us. We have a God who desires to be with us all the time, through our circumstances, through our difficulties, through our physical illness and our pain. And then get this, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is done with his time on earth, you know what he says? He says this, "And surely I will be with you until the end of the age." It wasn't just his time on earth that he was with people. He's able to be with us through our pain now. We have a God who approaches us when we are hurting. And it's really no wonder that Jesus can do that, because he's a prime candidate for such a task. After all, it wasn't an accident that the epicenter of all of Christianity, and in fact, the most important piece in human history, is found in an innocent man, Jesus, being physically beaten and broken down, insulted and spit on, lied to, rejected, and ultimately killed. In fact, it might even be said that Jesus Christ's best work was done when he was most physically broken. And so here's a question. Can that also be true of us in the midst of our sickness? The difficult truth is that oftentimes sickness and abandoned health can be a blessing. For some of you who are grappling with that doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound good. Watch what is said in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 5. This is the Sermon on the Mount. These are actually called the Beatitudes. And Jesus is teaching, and he says this: "You are blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and his rule." And then it goes on. Verse 4 says, "You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you." Jesus Christ shows us in John chapter 5 that he approaches the hurting in such an important way. And he approaches you. And then he adjusts our hoping. So I got a call the next day, as promised, from my mom. This was later in the day. And she said, they ran the tests, and your dad has cancer. He had esophageal cancer, and it was at stage 4. And that's 4 out of 5 stages, by the way. That's not 4 stars out of 5. It's not a good stage. And I remember that day because afterwards I went to the bookstore to look up more about esophageal cancer. And this was before Google and the internet. I mean, I think they had the internet, but it wasn't very reliable. But I went to the bookstore and I remember looking it up and looking up esophageal cancer and reading about it. And then at the very bottom of the section, in bold, it said survival rate. And I looked at the number next to survival rate, and just the pit of my stomach tightened. And I remember at that moment praying what you would expect me to pray, what you would expect anyone to pray. God, please heal my dad. Please take the cancer away. But there's a big difference between asking God to fulfill our plans and being willing to go along with his. In this passage that we looked at, in verse 7 in particular, we see that the solution to the man's problem, who was sitting by the pool was actually standing next to him in the person of Jesus, but he failed to see it because he was so focused on getting into the pool. Now, so I told you, catch up on this. So the folklore around this pool was this, that an angel would stir the waters of the pool every once in a while. And then if you were the first person in to the pool, that you would be physically healed. Well, this guy had been trying and trying. I don't know whether that's true or not. I guess it could have been. It probably wasn't true that you could get healed by the waters, but he believed it. He believed it enough to sit there and wait for 38 years. You know, one of the side effects of being sick is that it quickly becomes our foremost task to get better, which is entirely understandable. But it's also potentially misguided because while for some, plans for recovery may very well work, and when they do work, there's a word that we can attach to an emotion that describes that, and it's this: yes! Right? But guess what? There's also the times when it doesn't work. When we're not physically healed. And there's a word that we attach to that emotion as well. And that's called despair. Far too often we react to abandoned health by praying desperately for healing, knowing that it can really end up one of two ways, right? Either in celebration or in desperation. And none of us can possibly know which one it will be. But Jesus, listen to this, Jesus, by approaching the man, offers a third option. And that third option far surpasses the other two. The third option was standing right next to the man. Jesus trying to adjust where he was placing his hope. Here's the point. When you are sick, when you find yourself abandoned by health, you should go to the doctor. You should go to the hospital. You should find the right medicines. Do everything you can to get better. Get second opinions. Utilize as many resources as you can. Even pray for miraculous healing. But if you place all of your hope in health, I can promise you, at one point or another in your life, it will let you down. But there is one in whom we can place our hope, who will never abandon us, even when health does. He's the one who draws near to us and stays close through the most difficult times. The invalid in John 5 was placing his hope for healing in physical restoration that he was guessing might have come if he got into the pool. But Jesus says, look to me for real healing. In January 2004, almost 15 years ago to this day, I was 24 years old at the time, and my dad, I got a call that my dad didn't have much longer to live, and so we flew to be with him, and a few days later he passed away after a 2-year bout with cancer. And that was not what I had prayed for. And that was not what he had prayed for. And that was not what my family and my friends had prayed for. Yet this man in John chapter 5 didn't even recognize Jesus. Did you notice that in the text? He didn't even recognize Jesus. And Jesus healed him anyway. Oh, was he just lucky? Was he in the right place at the right time? Does that mean my dad was in the wrong place at the wrong time? How does that work? Here's the mystery. Some people experience physical healing and others never do. Some people experience physical healing, others never do. But what we do know, the Bible teaches us that God is chiefly concerned about offering us real life. That's his primary goal. And it's interesting that Jesus spends so much of his time in ministry healing physically and going to where sick people are and being with them. Yet, when Jesus was asked to describe himself in John 14:6, he says, he did not say, I am the way and the truth and the healer. He didn't say that. He said, I am the way and the truth and the life. Because the life that he has to offer is bigger. It's bigger than our physical bodies. Jesus says to the man after he had been healed in verse 14, did you catch this right at the end of the passage that we were looking at? He says, stop sinning or something worse is going to happen to you. Did you scratch your head a little bit like what did he sin? What's the deal? There's a lot of different speculation on what that meant. But I think we find the answer when we look at the preceding verse in 13. I think we find out what the sin was. It was that the healed man had no idea who Jesus was. You see, while it was accurate to say that that man in John chapter 5 was no longer sick, we can also say he had not yet been truly healed. It's incredibly ironic, by the way, that John, the author of this gospel, in verse 10, includes in here the complaints of the Pharisees. Did you notice the complaints of the Pharisees? He was healed and they were like, hey, you can't be healing people on the Sabbath. That's very important to keep this, and so we can't do this. You see, both the man and the Pharisees were both guilty of being so consumed with what was happening on the outside in their lives that they completely missed the amazing grace that Jesus wanted so badly for them to receive on the inside. And you know what? That's his desire for you and for me as well. That we would receive his amazing grace on the inside, no matter what is happening on the outside. True healing is of the heart, Jesus knew, because it is only our heart which lasts forever. I feel like this is illustrated so well in Daniel chapter 3. I'm going to pick up in verse 17, but just a little background. These were three dudes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were not going to bow down to the king's gods that he had. King Nebuchadnezzar, awesome name. They weren't going to give in. And so King Nebuchadnezzar was going to throw them in the fiery furnace. And you would expect them to be so concerned and consumed by their bodies that they'd be like, all right, we'll say whatever you want as long as you preserve this. They didn't do that. Listen to this. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, King Nebuchadnezzar, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up, even if he does not. Even if he does not. Some of you are here this morning and you're suffering, physically you're suffering from a crippling anxiety or depression that it's been going for a while and you're not sure when it's going to be over. Some of you are here this morning suffering from a chronic illness that you're not sure if this thing's going away. You don't know. Some of you are here this morning and you're a caregiver to someone who's been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And you hurt right alongside of them. And those things, and you can name your own, those are just 3 examples of so many. Those are your blazing furnaces. Those are the fires. I love what Beth Moore says about Daniel chapter 3. She says, God will either deliver you from the fire, He'll deliver you through the fire, or straight into His arms. And you know, all three are victories when they're found in Jesus. But you know the best part of Daniel chapter 3? Listen to this. So they get thrown into the fiery furnace. And they're in there for some time. And then verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar, he leaps to his feet in amazement. And he asks his advisors, weren't there 3 men that were tied up and thrown into the fire? His advisors replied, certainly, there were, Your Majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Second Corinthians 4:16 again. Even though on the outside it often looks like things are falling apart on us, on the inside, where God is making new life, not a day goes by without His unfolding grace. This is my prayer for you this morning, that you would believe that. Maybe this morning this is just the beginning to you taking the step to even considering these truths in the midst of your physical sickness. God draws near. He is with us, no matter what happens. Craig Barnes, the author of the book that I was telling you about, When God Interrupts, he puts it this way. God does not give us the things that we want. He does not give us explanations. He just gives us Himself. In the church, we call that discovery worship. And that, we believe, is the purpose of life. I want to close our time together by taking a look at the second part of the stories of those who were so gracious and brave to share at the beginning. And then we're going to close with worship. We're going to sing 2 songs together. And my hope and prayer for each one of us is, no matter what you are facing this morning, that you will be able to sing those songs and the truths that are found in those songs with a whole heart that believes that God is good in the middle of the hurt.